So today we have awesome panelists today to talk about how do we take stories, how do we take data, and really use them to communicate our impact to our constituents and our donors. So I'll begin quickly and just kind of set the tone, and then we're going to have each of the panelists present about what they've been doing and their experience and their thoughts on this topic. And then I'll ask a couple of questions, and we will open it up to the floor for your questions. Okay? All right. So just as a kind of a brief context, the way that I got involved in this topic of transparency and engagement was when I was the founder and publisher of the Stanford Social Innovation Review, when many donors who are my friends would come to me and ask me, who should I give to? How do I know that these organizations are worthy of my money? And we came up with this was the reason why they were asking these questions. There's a lack of compelling information for donors to make decisions about which organizations to give to. Right now, you can see, donors make decisions based upon very little information. They give this money to nonprofits. Nonprofits spend a lot of money trying to raise those funds, trying to increase their donor base. And the money goes to beneficiaries, who often don't have a voice in this entire process, and whose stories are actually really remarkable, and in our opinion, if they were surfaced more, could actually help the nonprofits raise more money. So the ecosystem that we're really seeing as the future is when all these disparate parts are connected, when there are stories and data available to donors for them to see the impact of the nonprofits. And when that happens, the cost of raising the money for the nonprofits will go down. The ease of fundraising will go down. They will be able to attract more donors with the availability of these stories and the data. And the people that we seek to help, those constituents of ours, whether they're low-income people, whether they're children, they're elderly, they will have a voice in this ecosystem. And their stories and their data that you will be collecting could help you to get to your fundraising goals. So currently our site is called greatnonprofits.org. It is, as Steve described, kind of like a Yelp about nonprofits. Except we don't take any sponsored ads, so there's no way to change your rankings on our site. We have more than 4 million annual users of the website who come there to look for stories about impact of your organization. Most of the stories are actually invited by nonprofits yourselves, so you might be sending an invitation to your donor to write a review, or your clients to write a review, or your volunteers to write a review. And then we syndicate these reviews to GuideStar, who's one of our partners, as well as America's Charities, as well as Just Give, and 4 other platforms. So a variety of donors, over 20 million donors, are actually seeing the reviews of your organizations. And this is, why do we do this? It's because we see from donors this rising tide of expectation around transparency and impact. So in the old days, if you had a great brand, donors would give you money because they're like, okay, well, we've heard of them. But now increasingly donors want to give with both their head as well as their heart. And so the panel that we put together today will really explore how do you get your message out that appeals both to the head and the heart. With that, I will kick it off to my fellow panelists who can tell us a little bit about their work and what they've been seeing as trends in the sector and towards helping nonprofits get their messages out.
Okay, great. I'm Anthony Schopp. I'm so excited to be here. Before starting Social Driver, I was in the nonprofit sector. I was involved with the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network on the board, so I'm always really excited to work with America's Charities. I'm really excited about this conversation about data, and I might take a little bit of a different approach than what we've been talking about this morning, because I think that rather than thinking about how we tell our stories, we have to think about the stories that the people that we are trying to reach are telling and writing every day, and how we can get to them. And so that's sort of the lens I'm going to look at that through. And I want to just start by asking, how many of you saw this? How many of you saw the dress? Did you see black and blue? Yeah. Did you see white and gold? Okay. Well, brands really tried to get on top of this because this is the most shared image of the year. And you can see McDonald's and Oreos and Snickers and all these companies that tried to get in on this viral sensation. But I think what's so exciting for nonprofits is that the winner, the one that actually did the best job taking advantage of this trend, was not a big brand. It was the South African chapter of the Salvation Army with this, and it says, "Why is it so hard to see black and blue?" And it's a woman with bruises, and she's in the white and gold dress, and it raised awareness around domestic abuse. And this was the most shared image about the dress. That wasn't the dress. It wasn't Oreo. And you know, we've gone through a period of time where everyone I know at nonprofits laments, how can I ever get out there as much as these big corporations like Oreo that have way more money than me? And I think this is a good lesson for us. You can do it now. You actually can compete because you can connect to people through causes and what they care about in ways that those brands probably can't. So we should feel really excited. I think we have to ask ourselves, why the dress though? Why was this dress image so big on social media anyway? And if I had more than 7 minutes, I would ask you, and we'd have it done, but I'll just, I think what we find is it was a question, and it was a conundrum, and it was a contest. But the key takeaway here is it wasn't about an outfit, it was about you. It was about how you saw the world and how you compared to your friends and your perspective on things. And that's what I want to emphasize when I talk about the storytelling piece. If we focus on telling our story, it works great for people who already care about us and want to listen, but in a very noisy world where we're trying to get in front of people and be relevant, we have to realize that everybody's writing a real-time autobiography every day by checking in and by tweeting and texting and posting on Facebook. And so rather than try to interrupt them with our story, we have to ask, how can I get to be a character in that autobiography that they're already writing? Or as Lynn and I have said before, how do I jump into that selfie with them and get permission to be part of that selfie? So I think data can really help us do that. And I just want to identify 3 things that I've seen organizations do using data. And I'm not going to dive into social data and how you can match on Facebook and those kind of things, although I'm happy to talk about that as that comes up. So I'm taking a little different angle with these. The first is to leverage converging media. When we look at the media landscape, it is not separate anymore. It's not paid media ads over here and PR earned over here and my social media here. These are converging. And the successful initiatives happen at the intersection where these overlap. That area is where we unleash the energy in our people. And so I'll show you a quick example related to STEM, which is apropos since we heard several STEM mentions this morning. A group called Change the Equation, I think, did this really well. They looked at their data that they had, and they found that they took the top US cities for advanced manufacturing, and they blogged about it. But they did it really strategically because these were cities where they had member companies that they wanted to engage with and where they wanted to strategically have conversations. And then they used social media, so that was owned media, and then they used their shared media, their social media, to share and to have conversations about that. And in the process, they pitched some people, but not reporters. They pitched the Tulsa Chamber, and they pitched Tulsa organizations that would care about this. And so what happened was the Tulsa Chamber picked this up and started posting about it, having a conversation. And that resulted in the media seeing it, and news articles being written about this and mentioning Change the Equation and mentioning the member companies. And so we went from owned media to shared media to earned media. Now we have a great earned piece that we can post to our owned media, email out, put on our blog, and we can repost with our shared media. And you can see it happens at that central area of convergence. And when you have data about what your members care about, or data about knowledge that you have to share, and you know who those influencers are, you can pull that data together to build a very powerful strategy at that center of convergence to reach people in ways that you couldn't have before, to become part of their autobiography and become relevant to them. So this was a really successful example of that. The second I want to show is about how you can drive results with visuals, visualize your data. You hear about infographics and data visualization. And this is one, I'll sort of talk over it, but where we see where we see data for an advocacy campaign, and they've done kind of what we're doing in the back of the room here. They've created some whiteboard videos that are really low budget to bring that data to life and to make it more relevant, engaging for their audience. And what we see on social media is when we take data and we turn it into visual, Twitter's data tells us that it has a 50% more likelihood of being retweeted and shared and engaged. So we can do that really well through media like this, or through this Vine video, which is a claymation around this campaign. Those 6-second Vine videos are becoming more effective because when you embed them on Twitter, they autoplay. So as I'm scrolling through Twitter, this automatically plays and it catches my attention. And then I'll show these are just infographics. You're seeing a lot of these, but when we take that data and we make it relevant to what our audiences care about, we feature them and we feature that data in an infographic, it's more engaging. And this is another change the equation example where they took some data that's been around for a while, but they turned it into visually compelling content. And this one got 92 retweets. By making the data accessible for people and mentioning the right people, they saw much more engagement than other groups that were saying the same thing. So that visual approach can really be powerful. And the third I want to share is about giving your users control. I just have two examples. One is an example of a Twitter quiz. So this is a new feature you might be seeing where you can take your graphics and you can stick them on here and embed those 4 graphics into a tweet that makes your audience engaged with you because you asked them to participate in this quiz. And then you can see if I click on 2004, when it fully opens up, it shows me that that's a correct answer. So that's a way of letting your user feel in control because they can click and interact with what you're doing. And then the last example of that is this website here in the District of Columbia, Learn DC, where we've taken all of the data from the school system and made it accessible to parents and policymakers through these interactive charts and graphs that you can even access from a mobile device. And what we see is more people are likely to engage if they can play with the data and manipulate it themselves. Reporters love that, policymakers love that, but especially consumers love that because it helps them be part of the story. So again, that overarching theme here is let's not think as much just about the story that we want to tell, but how do we find what autobiographies people are already writing and take our information and align it with what they're already doing so that they can be part of the story. We're a character in their story rather than trying to get them to repeat our story. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Sounds good. Thank you. So I am Chris Brooks. I work with Share Our Strength, No Kid Hungry campaign. Hopefully you guys have heard of us. If you haven't, go to www.nokidhungry.org. You can donate and hear all about how we communicate impact just by getting our email messages. And I should just leave after that, right? So a little bit about Share Our Strength. We were founded in 1984 in response to the famine in Ethiopia, focusing on ending poverty and hunger kind of all over the world. Recently, in the past, I'd say decade or so, really been focusing on ending childhood hunger within the U.S. We want to end the problem. And we launched the No Kid Hungry campaign around 2010, again, focusing on childhood hunger in the U.S. Couple things to note, especially as we're thinking about communicating impact. Share Our Strength is not a direct service organization. We do not have very many people who actually, or don't have anybody who takes a meal and goes and gives it to a kid. So that makes it a little bit tricky, and I don't know if anybody's spoken with Deborah Heller, who's here. She has to answer some of these questions all the time about how we do make an impact. And 3 ways: advocacy, awareness, and then we're connecting kids to effective programs like school breakfast, summer meals, after school meals. A lot of people, I mean, Deborah, again, will hear this all the time, but people say, well, kids can eat breakfast whenever they want to at school. It's not that simple. A lot of kids don't actually get there. There's lots of different problems, complications. They can't get there on time. There's a stigma related to it. Nobody wants to be labeled as the poor kid in school. So lots of different issues around it. So how does Share Our Strength communicate impact? Really easy. It takes everybody to do it. We've got to identify the needs. Our communications and development team work really well together to find out what are the stories that we want, what are the data points that actually make a difference with our audience, with our consumers, with our donors. And then we've got to gather and analyze the data. We got to loop in the finance and the program team. How much money is being spent with these different grants? What are the outcomes that come out from the different projects that we're doing, the actions that we're taking? And then we've got to collect those stories. You know, there's one thing to look at a report that says, in Arkansas, we did this much work with these many people, but it's another thing to get on the ground and find out about John, who is a teacher and works with kids every single day and sees the kids that come in that are hungry but because of the work that we do and the work that our partners do, can see the difference that it makes in the kids' lives when we are able to help solve that solution. We got to develop the narrative. Communications and development takes that data back. We always have kind of between these two areas is when we get a lot of pushback from the program team. Oh, that's not exactly the way it works. Well, yeah, but we need to massage it so that it's understandable and that the audience knows what's going on, because we can't give them a 50-page dossier on what happened on the program or the project. Then we craft the message and then we put it out there. So all hands on deck when it comes to communicating our impact. I like to think about it in kind of two different ways. We want to tell the impact at 30,000 feet. It's awesome to have those big wins. These two things here are some relatively recent announcements. 1.6 million meals in Arkansas. That was the biggest increase in summer meals in terms of volume anywhere in the country. So even California, that has the biggest population, Arkansas beat that because of the work that we did with, No Kid Hungry did with the partners that we had on the ground. We just in April, I think, announced, since the launch of the No Kid Hungry campaign, 345 million meals, additional meals, kids have eaten. So because of the work of the donors, because of the work of our program and our partners, we've been able to accomplish some pretty amazing, really big picture things. However, this gets a little, it's 30,000 feet. Sometimes it gets a little lost in the sauce. And so we also have to tell the impact at 3 feet. $1 can feed a kid 10 healthy meals. So that's really telling the donor what their gift can do. We hear this kind of all the time. Yeah, it's wonderful for you to provide 1.6 million meals. You know, all our partners and our major donors who can give tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of dollars can have a big impact. But what can my $25 gift do? Well, we're able to find that. And this number actually, took a lot of work to get to this number. We had to work with one of our program partners, and we did a lot of research on some very specific projects that we did. And because of the investment that we did, we measured the output. As a result of it, I think it was about a $20,000 project or maybe $200,000 project. We were able to connect kids with 10 meals for every dollar that we spent. So it was a real number. It's not some fake thing that we put out there. Obviously, people say, well, $1 can't buy 10 meals. That's true. We're leveraging programs that already exist. And then the picture here, this is Lily. We got to tell the story. Lily was a girl she's from a family that's struggling with hunger, and when there's no food on the table, there's no food on the table. And because of the programs that No Kid Hungry and our partners are implementing, she can count on food. She can count on healthy meals at school, after school, during the summer. So that's the impact on a real basis. You know, there's like I said, there's one thing to think about those 345 million meals and the 300 million people in America and 16 million kids in America are struggling with hunger. It's another thing to put a face on it and put a name and say, this is a real person. It's not her fault that her family is struggling with hunger. She just needs to eat and to get ahead or to keep up with the kids who can. Last, I kind of just wanted to point out, there's a couple of different ways that we approach how we talk about our impact and how we talk about our program. There's the complicated solution, so many different reasons why a family struggles with hunger. There's access to programs, there's just simply not available, there's lack of education, lack of awareness of what's going on. No Kid Hungry has a complex solution on how we go in and help solve the problem. And obviously the resolution is ending hunger. But then there's some people, they've only got 10 seconds to read your email, and they're not gonna go for this one on the left. They want to know that kids are hungry, that I can donate, and that when I donate, a kid will eat. And we show the lovely, cute, adorable face of Lily, and we say, this is the solution to the problem by making a contribution. So I think it's a lot about, and kind of in response to what we were talking about with the great nonprofits, and you know, there are donors out there who want tons of information, and then there are donors out there who don't need a ton of information. And so it's really about being able to provide both of these messages to the right audience. Yeah, that was kind of a whirlwind, quick way in about how we do what we do.
Excellent.
I'm with the Human Rights Campaign, the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, and we're the largest civil rights organization working for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality in the country, actually in the world. And I wanted to focus more on a little background on HRC, but then take you through the process of a campaign that we ran in Mississippi last year. Just to give you an idea, Human Rights Campaign, we have 1.5 million supporters and members. We have 500,000 Twitter followers, and I can go down in the list. And in any kind of social media platform, we have probably one of the leaders given the size of our organization. For example, I don't know if people, let me go, if you don't know our logo, you should. And when I finish this program, you will. If you're in any sort of gay-friendly neighborhood in America, you will see our symbol. And it's something that we use, I think, quite effectively. 2 years ago, when the Windsor case was being decided before the Supreme Court, we had the red logo, which some of you might have seen. It's still the most successful campaign that Facebook has had in sort of changing people's images. People use the red logo with their face, and that was the symbol for marriage equality, which we've been working on rather extensively. So one of the programs we started last year was called Project One America. Actually, it continues to be called that. And we were looking at the fact that there are very, very few protections in most of the South for gay and lesbian individuals, and that we were trying to make sure that we could impact those areas. For example, if you live in Washington, D.C., obviously it's a very friendly place if you're gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. But we had to look deep into the South to try to change hearts and minds there, because that's probably the most difficult place that we have to work in. So we go to Mississippi, and we think, who do we know in Mississippi? Who do we know in Alabama? Who do we know in Arkansas? In each one of those states, we have an office. The first time we've had offices outside Washington, D.C., and we have 3 full-time staff members. This is a long-term project because this is a difficult area of the country to convince people to support gay and lesbian causes. So what we did first is look at our numbers. We have a database of 6 million individuals, and so we can go and look and see, for example, in the 3 states I just mentioned, we have 39,820 members and supporters. That's not a whole lot compared to some other states, but it's, I think, something that's been very, very helpful for us. You can't see the detail here very easily, but we can segment it by, how long you've been a member, how often you've supported us, so forth and so on. We know how often you've opened our emails. I can go on down the list and give you that information. So we start with our 39,820 members, and we survey those people, and we ask them about their concerns, what their, how they interacted in the world as a gay or lesbian person in the Deep South. We also had to go out and do survey polling because we don't have a lot of people there. And probably the reason that we've been so successful in the last several years is that we are very, very good at telling stories. And it's telling our stories that gets us to the point where we can influence legislatures and we can influence opinion leaders. So we particularly went to Mississippi, and there is a population of 3 million people in Mississippi, and about 1.8 million of them are of voting age. And we surveyed each of those individuals, and we were looking to see what is the message that's going to resonate most with the people who we were trying to influence. And we sent out a lot of messages. I don't need to go through each one, but we came, you can see the top line one, our faith teaches us that we are all God's children was the most resonant message for anyone who was listening to what we have to say. So we developed an entire campaign. We got a bevy of consultants. We put together some ads, and we were able to use that information to influence people. We developed strategies for each state, but again, I'm focusing on Mississippi here. And in Mississippi, the question is, who are our new friends? How do we get new friends? We put together a very elaborate set of video messages that were broadcast, online, over air, so forth and so on. And I'll just give you a sense of what we were able to do with that, with the polling information and moving past just what we're trying to do with our messaging. It was a 4-week campaign. Close to 500,000 people viewed the ads, and I will briefly mention them and show you one of the ads at the end. We had 4,300 town hall individuals coming to talk to us about things. We had 832 front door conversations. We had 11,000 door knocks. We had 10,000 mail pieces sent out to various individuals, and 1.6 million online impressions just for this campaign in Mississippi. We had 3 billboards, and about 150,000 people a day saw those billboards. And we're talking about the Jackson, Mississippi market in particular, which is obviously the largest in the state, and the one that sort of gave us the biggest bang for our dollar. So again, we have lots of data. How do we then use that data later, particularly for fundraising events? And after we looked through exactly who we were reaching, we were actually quite impressed, because in it, of the 48% of the people in Jackson, Mississippi saw one of our ads, which I thought was kind of extraordinary. And we were able to move public opinion between 10 and 12 points on particular issues affecting the gay and lesbian community in particular. For example, on workplace protections, we were able to move it 11 points from where we started the campaign until the very end of the campaign, because people thought, oh yeah, we are all God's children and we all should be treated equally. And we were able to make that message incredibly resonant with a whole lot of people. When we were talking about employment protections, anti-bullying, we actually were able to move a lot of people. And it was, I think, kind of extraordinary for us, because particularly in Mississippi, it's so incredibly conservative, and in particular with the religious individuals. Close to 50% of individuals in Mississippi consider themselves deeply religious. In the African American community, that ends up being 63% of the people. And it is the minister, quite frankly, who really has a great influence over individuals. So again, All God's Children video was, the whole campaign was there to really resonate with those particular individuals. So if you look at the various ads that we had, so we had a transgender woman in one of the ads, which probably was a bit shocking to some people in Mississippi, but with the recent announcement with Bruce Jenner, I think a lot more people are considering those issues. We had a 4th generation gay soldier. I mean, his family has been in the military for the last 50 to 100 years, and he's a gay man. He said, I'm from Mississippi, this is who I am. And then we have a Bible teacher, and talking about her transition from being really kind of homophobic to being a lot more accepting. And then at the last ad, and I will show you this particular ad, we have the first African-American female representative in the House in Mississippi. Her son is gay, and she talks about her journey understanding him. And obviously, the whole point of all of our efforts is to influence those sorts of people, so when they vote. So if you could show the ad at this point.
Mark grew up in West Jackson. Being a child, he was just like everybody else, running around, having a good time, playing in the yard, playing with the neighbors. I had no idea he was gay or anything like that. He said, Mom, I've been trying to figure out how I was going to tell you and Dad. And I said, I love you. I love you, Mark. And don't ever forget it. Mark and I have had extensive talks. And based on what I have learned from him has made me a better person.
So with that ad, I find it incredibly touching. And with all the data that I've talked about, so we were able to gather all this information. And then, for example, one of the donors, who is a rather well-known businessman, whose name, if I mentioned, he wanted to be anonymous, you would all know, who helped fund this program. When we were writing the report, we were able to go through absolutely every detail of exactly how we were able to influence people. Then we can, so that was for that report, and then we can gather that same data, and we can segment things incredibly deeply. We can take that information, and then when we're applying for grants and so forth, and have a very detailed program of exactly, this is what we wanted to do, this is how we did it, and this is how we want to replicate that. So the next step in this process, to have similar programs in Arkansas and in Alabama. And we're also beginning to do work as well in Nebraska and Wyoming as well. And I think that sort of gives you an overall picture of the one very small program that we have, but we do quite a lot of programs like this, and we're able to segment people very well. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, these are fantastic examples, so vivid and concrete. So what strikes me is that, a lot of these examples are of kind of empowerment marketing. So empowering the user to tell their story, really looking at the donor as you're the hero, of the story, especially that example of, we are Mississippi. And similarly with the story of the gold dress, having the user be in that marketing campaign. How do you guys measure the successes of campaigns like this? How do you guys test? So for instance, you gave a good example of testing through those messages. Are there simple, easy ways to test that don't require a ton of time or resources for many nonprofits that may not have as large of in-house marketing departments?
I mean, you can always, there's always, as you're bringing in campaigns, you can usually, depending on what platform, you're able to create different systems to tag things coming through. That sounds more complicated than it hopefully is. And just from measuring, in my side, measuring the individual giving impact, we're always able to see how many gifts came through, measure that against previous campaigns. Pretty straightforward.
Well, I can speak to the social media side of that, since people always ask, how do you measure success in social media? That's a good, hard question that you should always be asking. When it comes to social media on the web, it's easier than ever to measure certain things, like views on a website or Twitter followers. Unfortunately, often the easiest things to measure are the wrong things to measure. And so what we have to do is make sure we have metrics that align with our campaign goals. So for instance, if we want to be a thought leader in STEM, rather than say, how many Twitter followers do I have, it's better to say, let's create some criteria that would help us identify the 100 most influential people in the conversation around STEM. Now that might be someone like will.i.am, who's a celebrity who talks about STEM and has millions of followers, or it might be someone who's the head of a think tank that only has a couple hundred followers but is very influential. So if you identify the right criteria for your organization and you build that list, then instead of measuring the total aggregate number of followers, measure how many people on that list follow us, engage in conversations with us, reply to us, favorite, and that can give us a sense of, are we reaching the right people? So I think one of the easiest things that a nonprofit can do, if it's a campaign in a certain state, if you're talking about your donors, identify a handful. If you have limited resources, identify 20 people who matter. Put those 20 people on a list. It can be a spreadsheet, it can be a Twitter list, and see, listen to them, have conversations with those 20 people and see what's working there, if the messages resonate and if they reply with you. And even if you're very limited in resources, you can do that in a small way and you can start to see impact. But here's the good news, when you do the right thing there, the secondary metrics tend to trend. So if you're having the right conversations with those 100 people, your total number of Twitter followers usually goes up because those people who follow them see the conversation and follow you, and then it's the right people who are following you. So that's one example of a metric, and I can add others later.
We're able to measure success, I think, on a variety of platforms in a variety of different ways. For example, say we publish a booklet on coming out, and that helps you come out to your family. Then we can document that. We can also look to something on the opposite end of the spectrum and look at the Supreme Court. I mean, at the end of June, we're all going to be down there marching, hoping to hear good news about marriage equality, and that's another way. In the middle, we can look at a legislator and see if we've been able to do hearts and minds and change the way that people are treated.
Great.
And again, we're really quite good at that.
Great.
Right.
So I'll ask one more question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So how do you guys, what are the challenges in storytelling with data? Is it harder than traditional marketing and communications? Is it a new burden, or is it a new opportunity if we have the right resources and people?
I mean, it's definitely an opportunity if you have the right resources and people. I will say one of the challenges that we have at Share Our Strength is just being able to collect the data. We work with a lot of different partners in a lot of different states, and it's not always easy to get the information that you want out of there. I mean, we're all busy, and I feel like at smaller nonprofits, there's almost even busier. There's wearing so many different hats. There's not a whole lot of time to pick up the phone when Share Our Strength is calling and saying, how many meals did you get out today, and what are your reporting functions? Because a lot of times we're really just focusing on getting the job done. And so as long as, I mean, there's definitely challenges in just getting the information out there. I think the secondary challenge is kind of similar to what you were saying about the social aspect of things, and getting to the right data is the kind of important part. And the way that at Share Our Strength we try to think about things is, or the way I try to think about things at least is, you know, there's certain projects and states that No Kid Hungry has a lot of investment in, but we try to kind of move above and take kind of a global picture when it comes to childhood hunger. So even if we might not have a ton of investment going on in, say, Wyoming, for example, we want to know what's going on there, and so we still have a footprint there, and we can still, you know, take that information and do some communications around it, because even though we don't have a lot of work there, we just have to get to the right information.
I think sometimes the biggest challenge is internal. It's convincing people who have this great data they've never had before. They can collect it more easily than ever before. They are so convinced that if people just knew this one thing, of course they would do the thing we want them to do, because they believe in it, they're passionate, they have the information. And we have to convince them to take a step back and realize people are writing their own stories, and you have to find out what they're already talking about and become relevant to their conversation. That means when we think of social media, 80% of your content should be having conversations and replying to other people, and only probably 20% of your content should be planned content. Most organizations, about 95% of their content is planned content, a beautiful graphic, you know, a great, well thought out tweet linking to their website, but those go out into a very noisy echo chamber where it costs a lot and is very difficult to interrupt people. And so it's switching that and saying, keep that data in your back pocket, have it accessible, make it digestible, but start by walking up and say, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Oh, and then I pull the right file and I respond to you in a value-added way, leveraging that wonderful data that I have. And so sometimes there's an internal enthusiasm, which is exciting because you have this great data that you have to say, yes, 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 but you know, you can't walk up to somebody in a cocktail party and not let them say one word for 30 minutes. You have to actually ask, well, where are you? What do you care about? What are you doing? And then find out how to respond to them. That's the biggest challenge I see, and it's an internal one.
It's a great one.
I think the challenge for Human Rights Campaign is that we have so many stories. And what story do you tell? And what story do you tell to a particular audience? I think the example that I gave before, that we actually have a different, well, we will have different campaigns per state because people have different concerns and different issues. And again, deciding exactly how a particular story is going to resonate with a particular audience, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Great. All right, audience. You guys have been very patient here, so you get the floor. Yes, please. If you can wait for the microphone, I think it's coming around. If you can tell us your name and what organization you're
Sure.
from.
Julie Eberly, Thorogood Marshall College Fund. And maybe it's to you, Anthony. Do you have any statistics around conversion? So, you know, I loved your example about the 100 people and you've got them engaged in that. But conversion, to get them then now engaged from a monetary kind of standpoint. Have you been following anything like that?
Well, what I can tell you is both in fundraising and in advocacy, and my experience lies a little bit more in advocacy, people trust friends more than they trust brands. We know that. People also trust strangers more than they trust our brands, our organizations. You know, if you go see an organization, or I use the restaurant example, best burger in town, I look on Yelp, worst burger in town, from a stranger, which do I believe? Worst burger in town. So what we find is the content then that converts the most people is user-generated content that is from somebody you know or they feel like someone you know. So I'll give you an advocacy example. The Internet for Schools campaign we worked on last year was to expand E-Rate, which is the program that funds internet in schools, and it's an FCC program. Well, previous efforts from nonprofits to the FCC didn't really get it. You know, the program wasn't expanded for over 20 years. But when we got principals and teachers from schools to post their own content, their own videos, and contact the FCC, what we found was that video from a principal reached fewer people. He doesn't have as many followers, but it converted a higher percent. The content from the organization, it looked better probably, it was 100% on message, it reached more people, but it converted fewer people. So going back to my converging media, what can you do to solve that problem? You can take the content that users create, take the principal's video, and pay to promote that so more people see it. So then you're getting the reach that the organization can bring, the conversion that the user-generated content brings, and then that resulted in thousands of people doing it. The end of that story is, because you always think, well, how does social media make an impact on this? When the FCC voted in December to expand E-Rate by $2 billion, they announced it using the Internet for Schools hashtag that this campaign created. So there's a bow at the end of the story. Well, obviously it impacted them because all these people were contacting them, they were responding using the language, they adopted the language, and then they announced the policy change with the language. I see similar things happening in individual donations. If I get an email from the MS Society versus a friend of mine posts on Facebook and tags me and says, I have a team and I'm doing a walk and I want you to give, guess which is more likely to get the donation. So it has to come from a friend or somebody who feels like a friend even though they may be a stranger.
Yeah, just to build on that, we see from studies of our users, of people who read the reviews on great nonprofits, most of the time they're reading reviews of strangers, people they don't know, yet 9 out of 10 say that the reviews help them understand the work of the nonprofits, and 8 out of 10 says it influences their decision whether or not to give. So the opinions of strangers matter to us a lot.
I'll also say that when you're talking about conversion, what you have to convert from is that's what it is. I worked at the Jane Goodall Institute before that. She had a relatively large, we have a relatively large Facebook following, but it was mostly driven by when she was delivering speeches at universities and colleges, not our donor demographic. Our donor demographic was a much older group of people, and so our Facebook conversions to donations was relatively low, but that doesn't mean that another organization doesn't have a much higher one because of the strategies that they're following, the inputs that are coming in and feeding that, following that program.
Thank you for that great question. Steve, yes?
Steve Gelf with America's Charities.
Wait for the microphone.
So, since you're here, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
How do the people in this room leverage great nonprofits to have more impact?
Great question. So we have a couple of different tools for nonprofits for you to become the hero in your own stories. So we have a top-rated status. So if you have 10 or more terrific reviews in the year, you get this top-rated status. We're working with America's Charities. So the better reviews you get on great nonprofits, the more likely you're going to qualify for the America's Charities high-performing organizations list. And then we also see nonprofits as Steve was saying, that what they do is they take a lot of the stories of the donors, of the clients, of the volunteers that they have, and they use them in various mediums, ranging from traditional direct mail to posting the reviews on social media to using it in their email blasts to their donors. So one organization, they send out an email in October to all their donors asking for stories about why they give to them. And then in November, they choose the best 3 stories. And then in December, they send out their largest appeal of the year with the 3 best stories from donors about why they give to this organization. And that email does, this is from the IRC. And that email performs really well. So think about how, you guys all touch the lives of so many people, whether they're people you serve directly, or they're your volunteers, or they're your partners, or your donors. Make those folks feel like they have a voice. Help them tell their story. And so, when you see the stories on social media, when a donor writes a review, retweet it, repost it. You don't have to create that content yourself. It's your community who wants to help tell that story.